Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and I think I got a pretty fun matchup this week. And what can I say? You guys saw the title, Godzilla versus Ultraman, the two gods of the tokusatsu genre. Odds are anything from the past like 60, 70 years, whether it be kaiju, giant mechs, anime, manga, odds are if it's got anything like that of the sort, more likely than not, it's got something to owe to these guys right here. But between these two titans of the tokusatsu genre, who is the stronger of the two? I know a lot of people in my comments said that Ultraman slams. I've never scaled Ultraman or looked into any of the feats and stuff, so I'm quite excited to see if that sentiment holds up to scrutiny. For today's video, I'm going to be using the original Showa Ultraman from the original show that aired all the way back in 1966. And since we're using Showa Ultraman, I might as well pull out my GOAT, Showa Godzilla. And the funny thing about this video is that it's somewhat of a canon matchup, as the original Showa Ultraman has fought in kaiju that were made of costumes from old Godzilla films. But without wasting any more of you guys' time, let's get into the analysis. I want to start this video off by talking about Showa Godzilla, as I already have a 20-minute video on this guy alone. So needless to say, I'm going to keep this one a little shorter than usual. And before I get into the Showa scaling, I would like to say for that video, though the ends are accurate, I feel like I could have reiterated some stuff, add in some consistency, drive in greater points here and there. And plus, my editing back then wasn't the greatest. Not to say that anything is special nowadays, but I think I'm getting better as I move along, so it's gonna be fun to talk about this guy one more time. But starting off with some of the lower ends, I want to talk about the Garguga nuke one more time. And I know, anyone who's been following Godzilla power scaling will know that this meta is like a dead horse. Everyone knows it. But there's a popular rebuttal floating around in the community. So while I readdress it and add on some more points to the overall meta, I want to use this time to address the rebuttal as a whole as well. But in order to do that, I'm gonna have to talk about the meta for some of the newer guys here. And well, in Zone Fighter, which is a canon show to the Showa era, the Garguga aliens have a nuke that is visually shown on screen to planet bust, with it completely obliterating the planet in question. And I just want to talk about how when they made this scene, right, they just had us like a PNG of a planet, right, and then they just threw in a dynamite like stock effect that is like boom, right? And because of Toho's cheapness, right, the actual yield of energy from this planet bust is calculated to be large star level plus. Like, it's really close to solar system level. I also want to point out that the planet in question was a gas giant, so Jupiter-sized planet, and look how instantaneous this explosion is. It's completely gone. Look at this. But anyways, this feat is important because the Garguga go on to say that Ghidorah is their greatest prospect for destruction. So people use that line of thinking to say that Ghidorah upscales this gas giant busting star level plus nuke. And I agree with this line of thinking, but some people don't. So what are they saying? They're saying that because the Garguga aliens don't want to planet bust the Earth as they want to conquer it in the context, right? They don't use the nuke because that's not what they want to do. So therefore, Ghidorah is a greater prospect for what they want to get done. So they're kind of inherently saying that Ghidorah is a surface wiper and he's a better threat for like civilization wiping or conquering. This logic inherently checks out, but it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And why is that? The same Ghidorah is also stated to be unrivaled and invincible in space, so inherently he would upscale any weaponry of the Showa era. But if you really want to play devil's advocate and say that it only means that Ghidorah upscales any other kaiju, not necessarily all tech or weaponry, there's a more even blatant statement that literally verbatimly says that Ghidorah's gravity beams are the most powerful weapons in the universe. And if we want to talk about statements made by the Garguga themselves, in a guidebook for Zone Fighter, it's stated that the Terror Beast missiles, in which all of the monsters seen in that show come from, are the Garguga's greatest weapons. So literally every bad kaiju scene that's controlled by these aliens, right, that Zone Fighter goes on to beat, would pretty logically upscale from that nuke we talked about earlier. And the third reason that I think that all the kaiju of the Showa era should upscale the Garguga nuke is because even without using this Garguga nuke at all and sticking to other metas, you can get the Showa era well above star level. So let's get into that. In the guidebooks, it's confirmed that Ghidorah is able to turn cosmic rays into energy, energy. And since cosmic rays only come from exploding stars or supernovas, this would mean that the energy Ghidorah has inside of him is equivalent to anywhere from 107 to even 232 kilovolts of TNT, or solar system level either way. But Showa Ghidorah's most prominent shown feat is him destroying the planet Venus. At first glance, when looking at the planet Venus, this might look like a basic white flipping surface destruction area feat, like Continental, nothing too crazy. But if you look into the guidebooks, it's actually confirmed that his gravity beams destroy things on a subatomic level, meaning that the yield of energy for any given feat would be a lot higher than you think it would be. So a low multi-continental feat becomes a planetary to even dwarf star level feat. This level of power is not nearly as high as the cosmic ray stuff, but it's important to note that Ghidorah destroys planets for fun, so the yield of energy for this feat should not be scaled to his base, as it's the most casual thing ever. He does it for fun. But we have a creature that absorbs cosmic rays and outputs planetary to small star levels of force for fun. Between being explicitly called invincible and unrivaled, and having the most powerful weapons in the entire universe, it's not that hard to see why upscaling the Gargooga nuke is still valid for the Showa era. While Ghidorah is stronger than Godzilla, they have shown relativity more times than not. So even though Ghidorah is stronger than Godzilla, it's not by such a great amount that Godzilla doesn't scale at all. So Godzilla would by extension scale to the stellar level of power. Now with the cosmic level of scaling out the way, we can start to talk about the previously mentioned Universal Plus stuff. And if you remember my last video on the subject, I basically stated that Zone Fighter beat a 4D being, granting him Universal Plus AP. While this is still valid for some people, I would understand why some people would be a little hesitant or on the fence to call Zone Fighter Universal Plus for his feat. But as for me, I'm doubling down on Zone Fighter being Universal Plus. And since my original video, I have found better points to really drive this point in. For starters, 4D is a pretty common term in fiction, so let's analyze it to see if what's shown on screen would be reflective of what would equate to a Universal Plus space. So let's talk about the original feat. Zone Fighter doesn't only destroy the kaiju, he also destroys its fourth dimensional net, which is also stated to turn the universe itself into a fourth dimensional space. Later on in the same show though, the characters get stuck in a different fourth dimensional space. Both are referred to as 4D, they're in the same show, so we can analyze this space in particular and liken that to the space that Zone Fighter destroyed earlier in the show. And for starters, the fourth dimensional space is stated to exist outside of space-time. The advanced radar of the Peacelanders can't extend into this fourth dimensional space, and third dimensional beings have zero visibility in the fourth dimensional space. So this isn't an instance in which the Toho creators were just throwing random terms onto the kaiju. So when they labeled their kaiju as 4D, it's safe to say they have a decent understanding of what that actually means. So with Zone Fighter being 4D, we can talk about how Showa Godzilla fits into the picture. And I can say that Godzilla upscales him as they can fight on par with each other via sparring matches, as well as the number of times Godzilla's just performed better than Zone Fighter in his own show. And by the time of the final two Mechagodzilla films and Destroy All Monsters, Godzilla should have upscaled Zone Fighter by a very considerable amount. But what amount? In my last Showa Godzilla video, I hinted at the multipliers being really big, but this time we're gonna get into that. So using Zone Fighter as our base here for Universal Plus AP, Zone Fighter showed relativity to a Terror Beast later on in the same show, and the same beast in the same episode was able to amp his power by over 100 times, and Zone Fighter was still able to match him and beat him, meaning that Zone Fighter should have gotten 100 times stronger than the time he destroyed a fourth dimensional space. Also, later on in the same show, there's a car compactor that can crush an object that is explicitly stated to be 10,000 times more durable than Zone Fighter. And I know what you guys are thinking, a car compactor? And for the much needed context, the Gargoogas made a car whose durability was 10,000 times greater than Zone Fighter's own power. Despite this, our good guys, our heroes, had a car compactor that was strong enough to destroy and damage it. Ghidorah being called unrivaled and invincible, as well as having the most powerful weapons in the universe, would mean that Ghidorah would upscale that car compactor. So using the math, bare minimum would be 1,000,000 times stronger than Zone Fighter, and by extension, fourth dimensional spaces. Godzilla, by his peak in power, can hurt Ghidorah, and weaker kaiju than Godzilla can even draw blood from Ghidorah. So Godzilla scales to this as well. Keep in mind this is a lowball, as Godzilla has his own multipliers via the two Mechagodzilla films. I don't really need that, as using Zone Fighter alone, you get him 1,000,000 times stronger than fourth dimensional spaces. This scaling hinges on Ghidorah upscaling Zone Fighter, but some of you guys may remember that Zone Fighter beat Ghidorah. But some of you guys have to remember that was a second weaker Ghidorah that doesn't scale to the peak of the OG Ghidorah who we're actually talking about here. So if Showa Godzilla is cemented into the Universal Plus category in terms of power, and potentially scaling to it 1,000,000 times over, how does Ultraman compare to this? Okay, and for the sake of time, I'm gonna be skipping the lower ends for Ultraman, and this is good because solar system feats in Ultraman are pretty blatant, like the time Ultraman turned a kaiju into an entire constellation of stars, which at first glance is at least star level, but seeing as how there are literally dozens of stars in the scene, I bet you guys won't have any doubts when I tell you guys there's solar system calcs for this. I've seen a weird calc that says this feat is only large star level, and of course that's the one that the Versus Wiki accepts, but to all you guys with eyes, you can see why that calc is ludicrous, as in the scene he created 2 entire constellations. The stellar scaling in Ultraman is supported by Zeton, who has an official calc, but for some of you guys who need context, Zeton's basically the Ghidorah of the show Ultraman run, as he's the most powerful kaiju in the universe. But anyways, there's an official calculation for the attack potency of his fireballs, which are 1 trillion degrees, and the AP of his fireball in this magazine was calculated to be around solar system, by an official source by the way. And this is even more consistent as Zeton has official statements that say that his fireballs would destroy the entire solar system instantly. Ultraman would go on to fight Zeton, and well, I'll save that part for later in the video. But moving on to the higher ranges of power, Ultraman has an infinite power statement. At first glance, this would be a high universal statement, but I wouldn't really take it seriously unless he had the feats to back it up. So moving on to the more quantifiable stuff, Ultraman's able to beat Bolton, who has many, and I mean many statements that say that he's a 4th dimensional being. Ultraman upscales him naturally as he beat him, and like last time, I'd like to reiterate that 4D in this context isn't just some random term, as there's a scan about Bolton which makes a distinction between the 3rd and 4th dimension. You can read it on screen now, but it's safe to say that he's universal plus off of this. Bolton was the strongest monster at the time, but he would eventually get power cliffed by the future kaiju in the series. Whether via statements or shown feats, Ultraman would have to get considerably stronger in order to show relativity to these guys. And while granted, some of the stronger kaiju are explicitly stated to be stronger than Ultraman, by the end of the show, Ultraman is top dog. And in order to prove this line of thinking, we're gonna have to talk about Zeton. Zeton appears in the final episode of the original Ultraman run, and Ultraman's performance against him is just, well, embarrassing. Zeton no-sells all of his attacks, and Ultraman gets one-shotted and put on a t-shirt. Zeton is the final kaiju in the Ultraman run, and he's stated to be the strongest in the universe in a number of supplementary material. So I watched the scene assuming that it would be like a kaiju fight, a back and forth, but no, it was pretty one-sided. And the only scaling Ultraman has as Zeton in this instance is like not getting one-shotted and blowing up after his attacks, if you call that scaling to someone anyways. But there's hope for Ultraman, as in the Ultraman special, which takes place a month after the original show, Ultraman does indeed get his get back, as by the end of his special, he scales massively above Zeton, and by extension, any of the kaiju that were previously mentioned to be the strongest at the time, which themselves would all upscale off of 4D monsters. So Ultraman, by extension, by the peak of his show, would scale anywhere from solar system level to likely universal plus. But how deep into universal plus is he? And fortunate for us, there is a quantifiable way in order to kind of gauge how deep he is into 4D. Ultraman has the ability to boost the AP of his kicks hundreds of times over due to having triple joints. So off of that bare minimum, he would upscale 4D by hundreds of times over. And then on top of that, Ultraman has the Spacium Ray, which one-shots most of the enemies that can endure his kicks. So it's safe to say that his beams are more than 100 times his base AP. This is notable because the Ultra Slash is 5 to 6 times stronger than the Spacium Ray, and then stacking that on top of that, he has the Ultra Attack, which is described to be several times stronger than the Spacium Ray and Ultra Slash, as the Ultra Attack Ray is described to be his most powerful attack. So at the peak of Ultraman's 4D scaling, he would be into that level of power like a couple thousand times over. And with the stats of both of our combatants laid out and discussed, who is the stronger of the two? And if you've been paying attention, I don't think you would disagree with me when I say Godzilla is the stronger of the two. As Ultraman scales into 4D like a couple thousand times over, but Godzilla could potentially scale into that a million times over. I didn't talk about either combatant speed, as both are into the massively faster than light plus category in terms of speed, but if you want me to get into that, believe it or not, Godzilla should be faster as well. As for speed feats relating to the original Ultraman, he's a little lacking, I'm not even gonna lie. His only good speed feat is him traveling back to his home planet, but unfortunately for us, he did it in an unquantifiable amount of time. His home planet is 3 million light years away from Earth, but like I said, it's unquantifiable. Later, Ultraman have went on to perform the speed feat in roughly 1 day, but here's the thing, every Ultraman is superior to the last one, and we're talking about the original Ultraman here, so it's kind of hard to scale him to that. So the best we can do is kind of downscale downscale Ultraman, if you believe it or not. We could say things like, it's narratively implied he makes it in a short amount of time, but we know that bare minimum it took him longer than a day, as superior Ultraman have taken that time. But the sheer distance his home planet is from Earth, even if the hypothetical trip took him decades to accomplish, he would still be massively faster than the speed of light. Compare this to Showa Godzilla, whose speeds are much easier to gauge, and they're much faster. Godzilla is able to fight Zone Fighter as previously mentioned, and Zone Fighter is able to fight Ghidorah while in his flight mode. Ghidorah was able to travel from the Space Hunter Nebula M to our own Earth in 47 seconds. The Space Hunter Nebula M is 30,000 light years away from Earth, and even if you lowball their speed and say that it took them 10 minutes to get to Earth, their speed would still be billions of times faster than the speed of light. But if you use the previously mentioned 47 seconds as a gauge, they would be hundreds of billions of times faster than the speed of light. And unlike Ultraman, Godzilla actually scales to this level of speed, and we don't have to downscale him by an unquantifiable amount. So using the official canon sources, Godzilla has a speed and power advantage. But how about statements from Toho and Tsuburaya that officially compare the power and speed between these two verses? And I've got two scans that I want to talk about. Our first scan talks about a battle between Ghidorah and Zedon, where Ghidorah unironically one-shots him with his gravity beams. True, Ultraman did one-shot Zedon by his peak in power. Ultraman still had to use his strongest attack, and he would still get impressed physically by Zedon. And in our second scan, which is a chart comparing all of the kaiju speed, you can clearly see that Ghidorah is faster than Ultraman. The flight speed, which we established Godzilla scales to. I don't think I need to say this, but just for some of the guys who don't understand what I'm saying when I say that Godzilla is billions of times faster than the speed of light, I'm not saying that he moves at that speed or can travel at that speed. I'm saying that his reactions and perception and attack speed should be relative to that. But anyways, using actual power scaling and then going on to say what the studios themselves say about these matchups, and it's actually really consistent. It's surprising. And they all lead us to one answer: Godzilla wins. At first glance, you would think they have similar stats, but you look into this matchup deeper and you will see that Godzilla has more advantages than not. And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I would like to shout out a number of people who helped me with this video. First, I want to shout out Dread Domamu. He doesn't have a YouTube or anything like that, so I'm going to shout out his friend Chad again. Hopefully that's okay with him. And I want to shout out Godzilla King of Monsters, who did a lot of the calcs for this video. KOTM also has a video on the Showa Ghidorah, so if you want to see that, I'll link his channel in the description. And with that, I'll let you guys go now. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments, give me some feedback. And until next week, I'm gonna go take a nap.